Hello, everybody. Welcome once to the Long Distance Worklife, the podcast where we do our darndest to help you thrive and survive and make sense of the ever-evolving world of work, particularly when it comes to remote and hybrid. I am Wayne Turmel. I'm your host. Marissa is not here this week. That's the bad news. The good news is we have another very, very interesting, insightful guest who is going to help us make sense of what is going on out there. And in this particular case, our guest is Alex Geesbrecht, who is with PRAX Leadership. Alex, how the heck are you, and who the heck are you?
Well, I'm very good, as you can see, because behind me I'm by a beach right now. So you caught me at a very good time. So how I am is great, and who I am is Alex Geesbrecht and co-founder of PRAX Leadership. And I was fortunate enough to co-found that with my brother, with whom I've worked for a very long time. And it's a pleasure. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, as always, thank you for being had. The world obviously we're in this state of flux. There's remote work, there's hybrid work. Maybe we're working with our team, maybe we're not. Let's start with a really general question. What is the state of leadership in the workplace today? What are you hearing that's different than it might have been, say, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think generally, first of all, anytime any company devotes any time to their people in terms of leadership development, it's good news. You know, you mentioned something there very early on about sort of this hybrid and work away and together. I think that's what a little bit different now than it was 5-10 years ago, is that pre-pandemic, the norm was that we were together. We had what we used to refer to as hallway conversations, where a lot of very important things happened that you couldn't measure. As it became a necessity and then maybe morphed into a bit of a convenience, maybe even for economic reasons, where people started being further and further apart from each other, I think we lost some of our connection. And if you look at just generally in the last 5 years, connectivity is at sort of an all-time high. I mean, the number of ways, Wayne, that I could reach you if I wanted to is almost limitless.
There is no hiding.
Right. There's no hiding, but very few people take the time that you have to sit down with another human being and have an interaction with them. So I think that that's changed. And I think maybe not for the better. It hasn't really benefited humanity for the better because of the lack of opportunities.
Do you think that's because the ease of communication has made it more transactional?
Man, I think I've struggled with how to phrase that, and I may have to just steal that because I think that's exactly what it's been. I think it has masked real connection. If I may be digressing a little bit, but I just sort of look at, where friends and likes have sort of, friendships on social media, they've sort of taken the place or satiated our need for actual friends. But there's a big, huge difference between having an actual friend and somebody who says they're your friend online. And I think a lot of times you can sort of lull yourself into believing that you have made a connection when all you've had is connectivity.
So if that's the case, as a leader, where do you think leaders in general, and I know your mileage may vary and all human beings are different and all those other lovely disclaimers, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about in general, where do you think leaders are struggling most in terms of connection?
I think being real, actually. A lot of the pressures that a lot of leaders have come from sometimes the top, sometimes below them, and sometimes themselves. It's what we refer to as sort of soft skills that people have. But I think it's rooted, to get to the root of your question, if you're asking me my opinion, I think it's people's comfortability with who they are. And a little bit of trepidation around just being real with their people. In other words, showing vulnerability. I think if you're a parent, I think if you're a boss, there's this tendency to want to be the smartest person in the room all of the time. And I think that leaders do a disservice to those in their charge when they attempt to portray that, because we're not perfect. We have all kinds of foibles and shortcomings. And I think that that's where leaders, if they could become more secure and with themselves, I think that they become instantly better leaders.
Is that what you mean? I was on, will be links to Alex and PRAX and all that good stuff on our show notes, dear listener. But I was on your site, and you kind of divide between, teaching general skills and self-leadership. Is that part of that conversation?
Yeah, one of the things my brother and I, we spent 20 years in the healthcare industry and had a chance to work together. And our company now is really the culmination of not just a general personal and professional ethos, but experience itself. And so what we bifurcate our company into two things, really: technical skills-based classes that we teach that implement the Praxian way of thought. And then the other one is focused on transformational growth. So it truly is a soft skills-based curriculum and several different curricula where we focus on the self. And I would just say that, I think a lot of times people say leadership, and sometimes they mean self-leadership, and sometimes they just mean being a leader. We sort of believe that everybody is a leader, not just because you lead yourself. And when you lead yourself, you have a tremendous capability of leading others. And so focusing on the individual is something that is very, very important to us. And we've seen the benefits therefrom in reality as applied to actual companies.
When we're talking about the individual, which is really, as we're talking about this show, it's individuals who are listening, right?
Yeah.
People who care enough about their leadership and about their work to want to be better. Where do you think the areas are that people need to specifically grow? I mean, it's one thing to say, be authentic and be true to yourself. How the heck do you teach that? I mean,
wow.
Just be more authentic. Oh yeah, I'll get right on that.
Boy, it's really what comes before that. That's a great question, because first of all, I love that you're asking it, because a lot of times people throw platitudes and trite phrases like, I meant something behind it, but thank you for giving me a chance to explain it. But being more real or being more authentic, I truly do believe that you can draw a direct line, almost syllogistically, from being real, okay, which I'll explain, all the way to happiness, which, if you sort of think, I don't know, maybe some of your viewers will agree with this, that it's kind of the goal. Whether you're in your life or your personal life or your professional life, which is really not that different. You're the same person, but that starts with being able to see yourself as flawed, which requires vulnerability. It requires a certain level of security. It requires introspection. It requires sitting down in a quiet room sometime and turning everything off and saying, actually, who am I? And looking in a mirror, figuratively. But in order to do that, you have to be okay with what that reflection will show you. And that's scary for a lot of people. But if you will take the time to introspect, to listen to feedback, and then go identify the things that are lacking perhaps in your life, whether they be personal growth skills or technical skills, and address those things, it's incredibly freeing. It can be scary for people. But once you understand what those are and you seek to improve them through people that know more than you, somebody that knows more about anything than I do, I would go to them. You get feedback. Any development requires practice and feedback. And you seek that out, and then you can actually make a positive change where there was once something that you considered to be lacking. So, yeah, I mean, I say real and authentic, but it's not about pretending to be those things. It's about actually being those things with an eye toward an improvement that does lead to happiness. So I don't know if that makes sense. I see it syllogistically, and I see them interconnected. I really do see being comfortable or secure with oneself and one's happiness, whether they're at work or at play, as being one and the same, or at least a condition precedent to the other.
Yeah, it feels sometimes when you take leadership training, it's if you can fake sincerity, you got it made, right?
Famous quote, right?
and that's not really thing. Is there, let me ask you this, is there science behind this? I mean, is there something beyond just kind of intuitively knowing that this would make us better?
Well, there's a tremendous amount. And so one of the things that we focus on is neuroscience, which is kind of this fancy word of the overlap between cognition and our behavior. So our thoughts and our behavior. And what we focus on to that end is the alignment of values and our prioritizations in our lives. So we all have these values, but if I were to ask you what your values are, maybe not you, because you've probably given this more thought than the average person, but a lot of people will just sort of recite aspirational values or things that they believe.
Okay, so when you say aspirational values, for example.
Yeah. I'm a family man, right? But I come home and I watch YouTube videos instead of playing with my kids, right? So my values, there's an argument to be said that I actually live my values because I live what is actually important to me and what I think about. But I tell you that I'm a family man, but my behavior doesn't match that, if that makes sense. So the alignment of those two things, which again requires a certain amount of let's introspect, let's find out what our values actually are, and then align that thinking with the behavior itself over time, not on a Tuesday sort of rah-rah session that's inspirational, but in a hard sort of practice, scientifically applied way.
I want to get back to this idea of the leaders kind of being self-aware, and especially when we're remote, we are so much in charge of ourselves, right? Or we're either in charge of ourselves or left to our own devices, depending on your confidence and competence level, right? Where are these specific skills that leaders can actually build to be better at their jobs, right? Specifically, if I said I need to learn something right now that will make me better, what kind of things are we talking about?
I would say emotional regulation. So how you influence yourself. So we have an acronym we call FITS, which is fully influencing the self. It's all over what it is we do at PRAX. But just as an example is just emotional regulation as opposed to dysregulation. So when somebody, when there's a threat, when there's a conflict, when there is something that frustrates us or throws us off our game, and just using sort of just very common lay terms, how do we respond to that? Do we go further and further down and compromise ourselves and others? Or are we able to step back, assess who we are, how we're reacting to it, and see it more objectively, and then apply the best next case as opposed to reacting in an emotional way? So self-regulation, emotional regulation is an incredibly important thing for a leader, because think about all the damage that everybody's had a boss that let's call it flies off the handle or reacts emotionally. And by the way, I don't use the word emotion in business pejoratively like a lot of people do. I think emotion is a tremendously valuable thing. I think directing that emotion is incredibly important, and having it be reactionary or emotive is incredibly damaging.
As you're talking, my brain is doing what it normally does, which is create about 5 scenarios at once. So let me just ask you about this. It seems intuitively that this might be harder to do at a distance than it is if we're together. If we're together, I'm getting a lot more feedback on how to respond. I'm aware of my body language and things because you're right there. Does being remote make it harder to do that? And how do you then, if it is, how do you overcome that?
First of all, I think it absolutely is. I mean, look, for today, when you look at what has replaced the meeting, it's the Zoom meeting. right? And so I really only have to be concerned with what I'm wearing from about here up. I do in fact have shorts on. I don't have to even have shoes on. So there's a certain lack of thought and forethought that goes into being remote. And I love the word you introduced very early on into this, which is it's transactional. And there are so many cues that we don't get when we are not in person, that I do think it's clearly damaging. I mean, look, I would have much rather sat down with you across a table. And this is better than a phone call, but I can't imagine, and this is just for me, I can't imagine conducting business with leaders. Like we used to have an executive team of 14. In our former business, we had 4,000 employees and we had 200 corporate employees that I interacted with at least once a week. And those 45 minutes, Wayne, were very, very important to me because I couldn't spend time with 200 people. I could spend a little bit more time with those 14 executives. But if I hadn't sat down and looked at the faces of those 200 people once a week and given them a chance to express what their interpretation of the words that I say I would have lost them. And I needed to feel not just connectivity with them, but connection with them. And as an aside, and one of the things that I would do is I would spend time telling them, they would see me fly all over the country, but I would spend time telling them where I screwed up and why we didn't get a contract that they don't have to work on because of something I did or something somebody else did. But we talked about that openly in person.
This idea of taking it, and it's not just emotional intelligence, it goes beyond just the conversation about emotional intelligence, clearly. Where's it going? Where do you see these conversations and this kind of thinking? What's kind of next, and where's it headed?
Well, can I just tell you my dream of where it's headed?
Tell me anything you want, man. I can help you.
All right. Okay. So I don't know if technology, Wayne, will drive us further from each other or if we will somehow harness it to become actually closer. But I will tell you what I want from companies and families and teams is I want there to be sort of a global realization that none of those constructs exist. They don't exist without people, without an individual. And I think that this world will be better off, certainly companies, certainly families, on a team level, when people and companies understand that you don't improve groups, you don't improve teams, you improve individuals. And so our clients, the ones that we want, which represents what I think is euphoric in terms of how a company would go about improving their workforce and creating a happier workforce, is for them to sort of step back and instead of just the lip service of, oh, our people are the most important thing in our company and this is who we are, where people come. That's great. But what does that mean? And instead of approaching it with the bottom right of the P&L in mind and KPIs and metrics, I wish that they would start to look at the improvement of their people a little bit more altruistically, which is tough to ask a company to do that, but to approach it as if what they've been saying forever was actually true, meaning that their people are actually the most important, and invest in them and invest in them for the sake of them. It's okay if they want to do the math and say, look, if Bob gets better and Frida gets better and Sue gets better, we're all probably going to be better. That's okay. But just for a minute, stop with the metrics, stop with the KPIs and ask yourself, when I leave a movie, how do I know if I like that movie? Do I write down, oh, I laughed 3 times. I didn't go to the bathroom. I barely ate my popcorn. Yes, I liked the movie. No, you just know. And one other thing I would say is that if anybody ever has an opportunity or a need to go seek the advice of somebody else, maybe even professionally, they go to a counselor. How often does a counselor sit down and say, okay, let's develop some metrics and KPIs around your wellness and how you're going to improve? Of course they don't. They connect with the person. They sit there. They do what you're doing. They ask questions. They listen. By the way, just to answer your other question, that is another thing that leaders could do better. Listening and empathy. And you maybe have to fake that until you make it. But there are several examples. But I'm digressing, but I would just say my dream is that companies would actually do what they say is important to them. And that is invest in their people, for their people, not for the company.
Madness, I tell you. That's crazy talk.
It is. Why I said it was a dream.
Alex, thank you much. This is great. Been a great conversation. Alas, our time is up. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Of course, you can learn more about Alex, about PRAX, all that good stuff by visiting thelongdistanceworklife.com. You will find a transcript of this show. You can find past episodes. You can leave us comments, show ideas, questions, vicious attacks, anything that you want to tell us. You can reach out to either myself or Marissa on LinkedIn or through email. And we want to remind you that a lot of you came to us because of our book, The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. That sucker came out in 2018. September 17th of this year, we are entering the second edition, an updated new information edition of the Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. The second edition goes on sale September 17th, and we hope that you will check that out. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you want to be a better leader in a remote environment, if you want to work on some of the things that Alex told us about, check out our Long Leadership series. We offer it 3-4 times a year as a public enrollment program. You can find anything you need in terms of information, pricing, all that good stuff at kevineikenberry.com. And of course, if you enjoyed the show, tell a friend, like and subscribe. I refuse to say smash the like button because I am not 12. But you know, you could push it gently and let us know that you want to like and subscribe to the show. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for another edition of the Long Distance Work Life. Next week, we will be back with Marissa. I am Wayne Turmel. Thank you for being with us. Don't let the weasels get you down.